Have you ever kept a family secret for decades? I won't ask what, just curious.
Picture this situation unfolding in the midst of what should have been the most joyful preparations for a lifetime commitment, where tool swatches and seating arrangements dominated every conversation. Yet my fiancé chose that precise moment to deliver a statement that landed with the weight of an unexpected storm cloud over our carefully planned future together. "My parents won't attend," he declared with a chill in his voice that seemed to echo through the room like a door slamming shut on any possibility of warmth or reconciliation, adding almost immediately afterward that it was undoubtedly better for everyone involved if they simply stayed away from the proceedings altogether. Those words refused to dislodge from my thoughts no matter how many times I tried to push them aside during the following days, lingering persistently like a stubborn remnant of unfinished wedding cake that left an unpleasant aftertaste, and, before long, that unrelenting curiosity propelled me into action. As I transformed into an amateur investigator determined to uncover whatever lay beneath the surface of his abrupt dismissal. Driving alone to the address I had managed to locate for his estranged family in a quiet corner of Ohio, far removed from our comfortable suburban life in Illinois, I felt a mix of resolve and regret building inside me with every mile marker that passed by on the highway, questioning whether this impulsive decision might unravel more than it resolved, but unable to turn back once the journey had begun in earnest. I had never imagined myself as someone who would intrude so boldly into the private matters of my partner's family history, particularly when Mark possessed that remarkable ability to close off any discussion about his past with a few carefully measured words that left no room for further probing. Yet after 3 years of building a relationship filled with shared dreams and quiet intimacies, followed by 6 months of engagement that brought us closer to vows exchanged under the soft glow of string lights in my sister's backyard during a late spring ceremony, his evasiveness started to wear on me in ways I couldn't ignore any longer. Mark Reynolds, the man with the defined jawline and meticulous approach to finances that ensured our joint accounts remained balanced and our future seemed secure through his work as an accountant for a prominent corporate firm in downtown Chicago, always deflected inquiries about his parents by stating simply that they no longer played any role in his life, his gaze shifting quickly to something more mundane like the latest news on his phone as if the subject belonged to a chapter long since closed and irrelevant to our present. But during one particularly rainy evening, as we sat together over containers of steaming takeout Chinese food spread across our kitchen table with its collection of mismatched mugs gathered from various road trips we had taken over the years, I decided to press him gently on the matter once again, only to encounter that familiar icy barrier when he repeated his stance with even greater finality, explaining that their absence from the wedding would spare everyone unnecessary complications and emotional turmoil that neither he nor I needed at such a pivotal time. Unable to shake the unease that settled over me like a persistent fog after that conversation, I waited until the following morning when Mark had already left for his office, immersing himself in spreadsheets and client meetings that demanded his full attention, before I settled at my laptop in the cozy nook of our kitchen where sunlight filtered through the windows overlooking the neatly trimmed lawn of our neighborhood. Working as a real estate agent in a competitive market had equipped me with access to various public records and databases that many people might never think to utilize. So, with a combination of determination and a touch of digital sleuthing through the county clerk's online portal, I soon uncovered the details I sought about Robert and Linda Reynolds, locating their residence in the small town of Milford, Ohio, which lay approximately 4 hours southeast of our home and appeared to be a modest ranch-style property purchased back in the 1980s with no indications of recent transactions or financial entanglements that would suggest ongoing distress. The discovery of their exact address sparked a flurry of questions in my mind about the reasons behind the geographical and emotional distance that Mark maintained so rigidly, wondering if perhaps an invitation extended on my behalf could bridge the gap or at least provide the clarity I craved to ensure no hidden surprises derailed the wedding plans we had invested so much hope and effort into creating. By the time Friday arrived, carrying with it the subtle promise of a weekend escape from routine, I had plotted the driving route meticulously on my phone's navigation app, filled a large thermos with strong black coffee to sustain me through the journey, and loaded up my dependable Honda sedan, the same vehicle that bore a small dent on the rear bumper from a minor fender bender during the previous winter's icy roads, with a few essentials including a light jacket against the unpredictable Midwest weather. The hours on the interstate provided far too much opportunity for second thoughts to creep in and challenge my resolve. With radio stations switching sporadically between classic rock ballads that evoked memories of my own parents, still actively involved from their sunny condo in Florida, where they offered endless advice on everything from floral arrangements to guest lists, making me reflect on how different my family dynamics had always been compared to the void Mark described in his. As I approached Milford, the landscape shifted into a quintessential small-town Americana scene with its weathered storefronts lining the main street, a solitary traffic signal controlling the sparse flow of vehicles, and rows of houses featuring lawns that bore the marks of enduring harsh winters and the passage of time without much in the way of updates or renovations. Pulling up to the address at 142 Oak Lane right as the afternoon light began to fade into a deepening purple twilight, I observed the unassuming facade of the home with its white siding showing signs of peeling paint. A front porch that sagged slightly under the weight of years with only a lone Adirondack chair positioned, as if waiting for an occupant who rarely sat there, and a mailbox overflowing with promotional flyers that suggested a household not overly concerned with current events or solicitations. My pulse quickened noticeably as I straightened the fabric of my comfortable jeans and walked up the short path to the front door, mentally rehearsing a neutral opening line about the pleasant drive or inquiring politely about the local history to ease into the purpose of my visit without startling anyone inside. Pressing the doorbell produced a resonant chime that reverberated through the interior in a way that amplified the quiet of the surrounding neighborhood, and I stood there for what seemed an interminable period, shifting my weight from one foot to the other while anticipating the unknown response that might await me. Eventually, the sound of shuffling footsteps approached from within, moving with a deliberate slowness that hinted at caution or perhaps age-related deliberation, and when the door finally parted open with the security chains still engaged, an elderly woman appeared in the narrow gap, her features etched deeply with lines resembling the patterns of weathered leather from years exposed to life's unrelenting elements, her gray hair drawn back into a tight bun that accentuated the sharpness of her gaze. Those eyes, however, struck me immediately as mirroring Mark's own with their piercing intensity that seemed capable of seeing straight through any pretense or surface-level intentions, and she uttered a raspy question about whether she could assist me in some way, her voice carrying the dry rustle of autumn leaves disturbed by a faint breeze. I parted my lips to offer my name and explain my connection to Mark, but before the words could fully form, she drew in a sharp breath of her own, her hand rising instinctively to cover her mouth as a flicker of recognition, or perhaps mistaken identity, crossed her expression, murmuring in a tone laced with trepidation that it must be Mark standing there on her doorstep after all this time. In that charged instant, as she fumbled hurriedly with the chain to widen the entrance, the door swung open further to reveal the interior beyond, and I found myself gasping involuntarily at the sight that greeted me, for the living room stretched out like a preserved relic from another era, cluttered with an accumulation of personal artifacts including walls entirely covered in yellowed photographs and meticulously arranged newspaper clippings that appeared to chronicle a single individual's life with an almost reverential obsession. The atmosphere inside carried a heavy, musty aroma redolent of long-sealed memories and unspoken burdens, and dominating the center of the coffee table sat a framed image of Mark from his younger days, capturing a smile so genuine and unguarded that it contrasted sharply with the reserved demeanor he showed me in our daily life, leaving me to wonder in that frozen moment what kind of tangled history I had just stepped into uninvited, and whether the secrets hidden within those walls would forever alter the path I had imagined for us both. That involuntary gasp from Linda Reynolds as she mistook me for her long-absent son drew me across the threshold of their home before I had any chance to reconsider or retreat from the impulsive choice that had brought me to this uncharted territory in the fading light of the evening. her slender fingers gripping my arm with a surprising firmness that spoke volumes about the desperation clinging to her daily existence amid the accumulated weight of years filled with unanswered questions and unhealed wounds. Stepping inside fully now with the door clicking shut behind us to seal out the encroaching dusk of the Milford neighborhood, I took in the immediate surroundings of the living room that unfolded before me like a meticulously curated museum exhibit dedicated to a life story marked by pride and profound loss, where every available inch of the walls bore the evidence of newspaper clippings yellowed by time and framed photographs capturing moments of apparent triumph from a bygone era, all centered around the achievements of Mark in ways that suggested an unwavering devotion bordering on the obsessive from parents who had poured their hopes into his future only to watch it slip away into silence. Robert emerged from the adjacent kitchen area at that moment, methodically drying his hands on a threadbare dish towel that had seen better days, his sturdy frame in the 70s carrying the remnants of a physically demanding past with broad shoulders now slightly stooped under the invisible burden of regret. And he assessed me with a measured glance that conveyed neither immediate warmth nor outright hostility before offering a gruff acknowledgement and suggesting we might all benefit from a cup of freshly brewed coffee to ease into whatever conversation I had traveled so far to initiate. As we arranged ourselves in the worn floral-patterned couch that sagged comfortably under our combined weight, the aroma of percolating coffee wafting through the air from the kitchen where Robert busied himself with the ritual of preparation. I introduced myself properly as Emily Harper, emphasizing my role as Mark's fiancée in a tone I hoped sounded reassuring and open rather than intrusive or accusatory, only to witness the subtle tightening of expressions on both their faces as if my words had evoked a ghost they preferred to keep buried deep within the recesses of their shared history. Accepting the steaming mugs handed over with a nod of thanks, I ventured into the purpose of my visit by mentioning the upcoming wedding in tentative terms designed to test their receptiveness, explaining that while Mark had expressed his belief that their absence would simplify matters for everyone involved, I wondered if perhaps an invitation might open the door to reconciliation or at least allow them to share in a milestone they had undoubtedly dreamed of witnessing from afar during the quiet nights when memories resurfaced unbidden. Linda's response came in the form of a sharp, almost disbelieving laugh that cut through the heavy atmosphere like a sudden crack in a frozen lake, her voice laced with a bitterness honed by years of isolation as she countered that frostiness barely scratched the surface of the chasm Mark had deliberately carved between them, recounting how he had severed ties with the precision of a surgeon excising a troublesome part of his life right after they suffered the devastating loss of their family farm, which had represented the backbone of their existence for generations in the rural heartland of Ohio. With Robert settling into an armchair across from us and adding occasional grunts of affirmation that underscored the gravity of her narrative, Linda proceeded to unfold the fragmented details of their downfall during the turbulent economic shifts of the 1990s, when small dairy operations like theirs faced relentless pressure from larger agricultural conglomerates that reshaped the landscape of American farming forever, explaining that Mark, armed with his newly minted accounting degree from a state university and brimming with ambitions to elevate their fortunes, had convinced them to invest in what he presented as a foolproof scheme promising rapid modernization and financial security through partnerships with out-of-state investors eager to capitalize on Midwest opportunities. Instead of the prosperity he envisioned, the venture collapsed spectacularly under the weight of fraudulent promises and mismanaged funds, stripping them not only of the land that had been in the family for decades, but also the modest home they occupied before relocating to this smaller ranch-style residence on Oak Lane, along with Robert's hard-earned retirement savings that he had meticulously built through overtime shifts at the local mill during evenings and weekends away from the farm. Mark, according to their account laced with the pain of betrayal, pointed the finger squarely at their outdated methods and reluctance to adapt quickly enough, declaring that he could no longer afford to be dragged down by their failures, and, from that moment onward, He vanished into the anonymity of city life without so much as a backward glance or a single communication beyond the occasional vague rumor filtering through mutual acquaintances about his rising success in Chicago's competitive corporate world. Sitting there absorbing the weight of their revelations while the coffee grew cold in my untouched mug, I felt a deepening unease settle over me as the image of Mark, the dependable partner who balanced our checkbooks with effortless precision and surprised me with thoughtful gestures like weekend escapes to lakeside cabins reminiscent of simpler times, began to fracture under the pressure of this alternate narrative portraying him as the architect of their hardship, a son who prioritized his own ascent over the sacrifices made on his behalf by parents who had scrimped and saved to fund his education in the hopes it would secure a better future for the entire family. Part of me recoiled at the thought of having pried so deeply into territory Mark had clearly marked as off-limits, recognizing the moral quandary of my actions that could irreparably damage the trust we had built together over 3 years of shared joys and challenges, yet another part, forged in the fires of my own past. Divorce where hidden financial deceptions had eroded the foundation of my first marriage compelled me to seek the full picture before committing to vows that might echo with unspoken resentments. To diffuse the tension hanging in the room like an uninvited guest, I shared a light-hearted anecdote from my own family lore about how my brother had once borrowed our father's prized pickup truck for what he claimed was a quick errand only to return it adorned with an unintended new paint job courtesy of a low-hanging branch during a misguided off-road adventure, eliciting faint chuckles from both Linda and Robert that softened their guarded demeanors just enough to encourage further dialogue without the immediate sting of confrontation. As the conversation meandered back toward the wedding details under my careful guidance, I allowed myself to reveal a few more specifics than strictly necessary. The chosen date in early June when the weather promised mild breezes ideal for an outdoor gathering. The selected venue in my sister's expansive backyard transformed with elegant decorations, and even the recent promotion Mark had secured at his firm, which provided the financial cushion to make the event as memorable as we had always imagined, watching intently for their reactions, which proved more telling than any direct words could convey, with Linda's eyes glistening unexpectedly as if glimpsing a lost opportunity and Robert's jaw setting firmly in a manner that suggested unresolved anger simmering just below the surface. In that subtle act of disclosure, I found a small measure of witty retribution against Mark's unyielding silence, a clever way to pierce his carefully constructed barrier by introducing the reality of our shared life into their world without his consent, satisfying the growing sense of injustice I felt on their behalf, while simultaneously planting seeds of doubt about the completeness of the story he had chosen to share with me alone. Yet as Linda rose to gather the empty mugs and Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, my gaze drifted toward the sturdy locked door positioned off the narrow hallway leading deeper into the house, its solid oak panel and the key hanging tantalizingly on a nearby hook sparking an irresistible curiosity about what secrets it might conceal from casual visitors like myself. Robert noticed my interest immediately and dismissed it gruffly as merely a storage space for outdated farm equipment and personal mementos unworthy of exploration, but in the distraction of clearing the table, I managed to dislodge a small stack of unopened mail from the side table with what appeared to be an accidental nudge of my elbow, revealing beneath it a crumpled envelope bearing Mark's name and an old postmark from over a decade prior that immediately drew my attention with its promise of hidden correspondence. Seizing the moment with the stealth of someone far more practiced in deception than I truly was, I palmed the letter discreetly while feigning interest in a nearby photograph, tucking it into my pocket as a tangible piece of the puzzle that now weighed heavily against the man I planned to marry. And as I prepared to take my leave with polite assurances of passing along their well wishes, despite the undercurrent of pain that colored every exchange, Robert pulled me aside briefly near the door. With a parting word that rang hollow in its forced optimism about not harboring bitterness toward their son, but acknowledging that certain fractures in family bonds proved too deep to mend through simple gestures or belated invitations. Driving away into the enveloping darkness of the rural road with the pilfered letter now resting innocently in my glove compartment, I unfolded it under the dim glow of the dashboard light during a brief stop at a roadside pullout, my breath catching as I deciphered the faded handwriting within that accused Mark directly of absconding not just with their financial stability, but also with the very essence of their trust after orchestrating a deliberate scam that left them destitute. The postmark aligning eerily with the year he had first mentioned pursuing opportunities in the city, leaving me to grapple with the dawning horror that the foundation of our relationship might rest upon a betrayal far more personal and devastating than I had ever imagined possible. Unfolding that stolen letter under the faint illumination of my car's dashboard during that impromptu halt at the deserted roadside overlook along the winding Ohio backroads, where the only sounds breaking the night stillness were the occasional hum of passing semis and the rustle of wind through the bordering cornfields, filled me with a profound sense of disquiet that twisted like a knot in my stomach as the scripted accusations leaped off the page in Linda's shaky handwriting directly implicating Mark in a calculated betrayal that extended beyond mere financial missteps to encompass the erosion of the foundational trust that should have bound a family together through the inevitable hardships of rural American life in the late 20th century. The drive back to our apartment in the suburbs of Chicago stretched into what felt like an eternity of introspection, with the highway lights streaking past like blurred accusations that mirrored the turmoil brewing inside me, prompting endless replays of the day's encounters, from the obsessive wall of clippings to the guarded finality in Robert's parting words, all while I wrestled with the ethical implications of my meddling that now positioned me as an unwitting accomplice in unearthing skeletons Mark had so meticulously buried to protect the polished narrative of his self-made success. Arriving home well after midnight to find Mark asleep on the couch amid scattered work documents that spoke to his relentless drive, I slipped quietly into the bedroom and lay awake staring at the ceiling patterns cast by the street lamp outside, the weight of the letter tucked safely in my nightstand drawer serving as a silent sentinel that challenged every affectionate memory we had accumulated over 3 years of companionship, marked by supportive gestures during my real estate slumps and shared laughter over home-cooked meals that evoked the comfort of a stable partnership. The subsequent week unfolded in a haze of routine obligations that barely masked the undercurrent of suspicion gnawing at my resolve. From fielding RSVPs for the wedding invitations printed on elegant cream stock to finalizing deposits for the floral arrangements that promised to transform my sister's backyard into a picturesque haven under the June sun. Yet beneath those surface-level tasks lurked the persistent echo of the Reynolds story that reframed Mark's occasional mentions of a challenging upbringing as deliberate omissions designed to shield me from the fuller truth of his role in their downfall. Sensing my preoccupation during a quiet dinner one evening where he prepared his specialty grilled salmon with the precision of someone compensating for deeper insecurities, Mark attributed my distant demeanor to the typical stresses of bridal planning in the lead-up to such a significant life event, offering reassurances about handling the vendor payments from his recent promotion that had elevated him within the corporate accounting firm, but his casual deflection only intensified my internal conflict as I pondered whether to confront him outright or continue gathering pieces to the puzzle in solitude. Disagreement with my own persistent prying surfaced repeatedly in those moments of reflection, recognizing how this boundary-crossing obsession risked fracturing the very relationship I cherished for its reliability and mutual respect, especially when contrasted with the fresh wounds from my divorce where similar deceptions had left me financially and emotionally adrift, yet the allure of clarity proved too compelling to abandon entirely, compelling me to leverage my professional network by reaching out to a trusted contact at the county assessor's office who specialized in historical property records and owed me a favor from a lucrative referral the previous year. The documents arrived via encrypted email by midweek, detailing the foreclosure proceedings on the Reynolds family farm with stark clarity that confirmed Mark's involvement as a co-signer on loans secured through a now-defunct investment vehicle he had consulted for during his early career, a revelation that painted the transaction not as an innocent miscalculation, but as a strategic maneuver to extricate himself from the familial obligations while funneling resources toward his urban ambitions. leaving Robert and Linda to shoulder the mounting debts that forced their relocation to the modest confines of Oak Lane. Armed with this concrete evidence printed out and annotated in the margins with questions that demanded answers, I resolved to return to Milford under the guise of a follow-up visit framed as an extension of goodwill. Baking a homemade apple pie from a cherished family recipe using tart Granny Smiths from the local market to serve as a disarming pretext for re-entering their home without arousing immediate suspicion. Arriving on a crisp Friday afternoon when the autumn leaves painted the rural landscape in hues of amber and crimson, I found Linda at the door looking even more fragile than before. Her posture slightly hunched as if the cumulative strain of their circumstances had physically manifested over the intervening days, and she welcomed me inside with a tentative warmth that suggested a cautious hope for the reconciliation I had dangled during our initial meeting. With Robert occupied in the overgrown backyard attempting to salvage what remained of his vegetable garden amid the encroaching weeds that symbolized their neglected dreams, Linda and I settled at the scarred wooden kitchen table where sunlight pierced the half-drawn blinds to cast elongated shadows across the linoleum floor, and as we shared slices of the still-warm pie accompanied by mugs of herbal tea that carried a faint chamomile scent, she delved deeper into the chronology of their unraveling, describing how Mark's proposed investment had initially seemed like a beacon of progress amid the broader agricultural crisis that decimated small operations across the Midwest during the 90s recession. He had returned from university brimming with innovative ideas drawn from textbooks and seminars on financial restructuring, persuading them to mortgage portions of the farm's acreage against promises of expanded operations that would incorporate modern machinery and distribution networks to compete with the industrial giants, only for the scheme to implode when the investors defaulted on commitments, exposing forged endorsements that Mark had facilitated in a desperate bid to secure the funding. The fallout extended far beyond the loss of land to encompass the dissolution of their community standing in Milford, where whispers of mismanagement followed them like persistent shadows, and Robert's subsequent health issues stemming from the unrelenting stress manifested in chronic back pain that limited his ability to find steady work beyond odd jobs at the hardware store. To inject a measure of levity into the somber recounting, I recounted a humorous episode from my own familial past involving my sister's ill-fated attempt at home brewing craft beer during her college years, which resulted in an explosive batch that coated the garage ceiling in sticky foam and earned her the nickname Brewmaster Disaster among our relatives, drawing a soft, genuine laugh from Linda that briefly illuminated her features and encouraged her to continue without the full weight of defensiveness. Steering the dialogue toward the locked room once more with feigned casual interest in preserving family heirlooms, I suggested helping her organize some of the stored items to perhaps uncover positive mementos that could facilitate outreach to Mark. And after a moment's hesitation, she retrieved the key from its hook, granting access to the dimly lit space filled with towering boxes labeled in faded marker with references to harvest seasons long past. As we sifted through ledgers yellowed with age and bundles of correspondence tied with twine, I positioned my phone unobtrusively on a nearby shelf under the pretense of checking a real estate listing for a comparable property, activating the voice recording app to capture her unguarded murmurs that slipped out amid the dust motes dancing in the slanted light from a small window. "He carries the guilt over Sarah too, you know," she confided in a voice barely above a whisper, linking the financial catastrophe directly to the downward spiral of his younger sister, who had sought escape in prescription pills originally intended for Robert's ailments, her addiction exacerbated by the family's fracturing under the strain of bankruptcy proceedings and public scrutiny. This covert recording served as my ingenious form of retribution against Mark's deceptions, a sly digital trophy that documented the human cost of his choices in a format irrefutable and intimate, allowing me to preserve the testimony without immediate confrontation while satisfying the burgeoning need for accountability that had taken root in my conscience. Transitioning to the living room where framed photographs lined the mantel like silent witnesses to happier times, We examined images of the family in their prime with Mark posing proudly beside a gleaming tractor and a teenage Sarah beaming with unbridled enthusiasm during what appeared to be a county fair event. Her features sharing the same determined chin as her brother, yet softened by a youthful innocence that the subsequent tragedies had evidently extinguished. Linda's narrative grew more poignant as she touched on Sarah's untimely death, ruled as an accidental overdose 15 years prior, coinciding precisely with the farm's collapse when tensions within the household reached a boiling point. And Mark had been entrusted with her care during a particularly volatile evening, marked by arguments over the mounting debts that foreshadowed their eviction. In the midst of this revelation, my eyes caught sight of a photograph tucked partially behind a larger portrait, depicting Mark in his early 20s cradling an unfamiliar child on his knee during what looked like a holiday gathering. The boy's wide-eyed curiosity adding an inexplicable layer to the family portrait that Linda quickly moved to obscure with a casual adjustment of the frame. Pressing gently for context, she deflected with a vague mention of a cousin's visit, but the image lingered in my mind as an anomalous thread in the tapestry of their estrangement, hinting at connections or secrets extending beyond the immediate circle I had imagined. As the afternoon waned and Robert returned from the garden with soil-caked hands and a weary expression, he overheard fragments of the discussion and interjected firmly, urging me to depart before the conversation delved into territories that could only breed more sorrow without resolution, his plea carrying an undercurrent of protectiveness that bordered on desperation. Yet in the final moments before I gathered my belongings and stepped toward the door, my peripheral vision snagged on a faded newspaper clipping pinned haphazardly to the wall among the more celebratory articles. Its headline partially obscured, but clearly referencing a local girl's suspicious demise under circumstances that the accompanying text described as warranting further investigation beyond the official accidental verdict. The date aligning perilously close to the night Sarah had been left alone, leaving me to exit the house with a racing heart and the chilling suspicion that the shadows of the farm concealed not just financial ruin but a deeper, more personal tragedy tied inextricably to the man I had pledged my future to. Exiting the Reynolds home with that faded newspaper clipping's ominous headline still searing into my memory, like an indelible mark from a cautionary tale whispered among the tight-knit farming communities of rural Ohio, where suspicions of foul play often lingered unresolved amid the practical demands of survival and the reluctance to stir up official inquiries that could further disrupt already fragile lives. I navigated the deepening twilight back to my car parked discreetly a block away to avoid drawing unnecessary attention from neighbors who might recognize Mark's vehicle or report an unfamiliar face lingering too long on Oak Lane. The anonymous text that had arrived earlier on my phone during the conversation with Linda now felt like a harbinger of escalating complications. Its terse warning to cease digging into matters best left undisturbed resonating with a chilling prescience that made me glance over my shoulder repeatedly as I merged onto the interstate heading northwest toward Chicago, the rural scenery giving way to the sprawling industrial outskirts that symbolized the very escape Mark had pursued at the expense of his family's stability. Returning to our apartment under the cover of nightfall, where Mark awaited with a casual inquiry about the details of my supposed property scouting excursion for a high-end client in the region, I fabricated a narrative involving promising leads on undervalued lots near the lakefront while inwardly recoiling at the ease with which deception flowed from my lips, a skill honed unwillingly from my own past marital betrayals that now positioned me in a morally ambiguous role where the line between protector and intruder blurred with every passing hour. The days following that second visit to Milford unfolded in a tense rhythm of feigned normalcy interspersed with clandestine efforts to corroborate the fragments of information I had gathered. From coordinating the final touches on our wedding invitations that evoked images of an idyllic June gathering complete with personalized place settings and a string quartet to maintain the illusion of untroubled anticipation. Yet Mark's growing perceptiveness began to pierce through my composed facade as he commented during a shared breakfast of scrambled eggs and fresh fruit on the subtle shifts in my attentiveness that suggested deeper preoccupations beyond the logistical hurdles of event planning. To test the waters without igniting a full confrontation that could shatter the fragile equilibrium we had maintained for 3 years of partnership built on mutual support through career ups and downs and quiet evenings unwinding with episodes of classic sitcoms that reminded us of simpler relational dynamics. I broached the subject of family legacies indirectly one evening over a bottle of robust Cabernet Sauvignon poured into our favorite stemless glasses on the balcony overlooking the twinkling city lights, posing a hypothetical scenario drawn loosely from articles I had read about intergenerational wealth transfers gone awry in the wake of economic downturns that had ravaged family businesses across the Midwest. His response came measured and evasive, dismissing such tales as cautionary fables for those unwilling to adapt to modern financial realities while emphasizing his own forward-looking philosophy that prioritized building anew rather than dwelling on historical grievances. A deflection that only heightened my internal discord as I recognized the parallels to the Reynolds plight and questioned the wisdom of my relentless pursuit that risked alienating the man whose steady presence had helped me rebuild after the devastation of my divorce involving concealed debts and courtroom battles over assets. Disagreement with my own choices intensified in those reflective interludes, acknowledging how this solitary quest for truth veered perilously close to the obsessive behaviors I had once criticized in my ex-husband's secretive financial maneuvers that had eroded our trust irreparably. Yet the compulsion to safeguard our future from potential landmines proved stronger than the voice of caution urging me to confide in Mark and seek joint resolution, compelling me instead to deepen my investigation through professional channels where my expertise as a real estate agent granted unparalleled access to layers of documentation that could expose inconsistencies in the narratives presented by all parties involved. Leveraging a long-standing connection with a title search specialist at a prominent firm in Columbus who specialized in unraveling complex ownership histories for distressed properties, I requested a discreet review of not only the original farm deed but also the current status of the Oak Lane residence, framing the inquiry as preparatory research for a potential inheritance case to preserve confidentiality, while the results trickled back over the course of a tense afternoon spent showing vacant condos to prospective buyers whose enthusiasm contrasted sharply with my distracted state. The findings arrived encrypted and comprehensive, revealing that the ranch-style home on Oak Lane had never fully transferred into Robert and Linda's sole ownership following the farm's foreclosure, but remained encumbered by a lingering lien tied to the same investment entity Mark had consulted for. A revelation that suggested he retained indirect control, or at minimum a financial stake, that contradicted his portrayed estrangement and painted the parents' poverty as a sustained manipulation, rather than a clean break from the past. This discovery fueled a surge of clever retribution as I cross-referenced the documents against public filings to compile a dossier that highlighted the discrepancies with annotated highlights and timelines, a witty compilation designed not for immediate legal action, but as leverage to force transparency in our relationship, satisfying the growing itch for accountability that had transformed my initial curiosity into a calculated campaign against the veil of secrecy shrouding Mark's origins. Determined to press further despite the mounting risks that made every drive toward Milford feel like venturing into increasingly hostile territory, I embarked on a third visit midweek under the pretext of delivering printed copies of old family photos I had digitized from their walls during the previous encounter, arriving at dusk when the streetlights flickered to life, casting elongated shadows that amplified the sense of isolation enveloping the quiet neighborhood. Linda answered the door with a mixture of relief and apprehension etched across her features, her frailty more pronounced as she confided in hushed tones about Robert's recent doctor's appointment revealing complications from long-standing prostate issues exacerbated by the chronic stress of their financial precarity. Inviting me into the kitchen where the air hung heavy with the scent of simmering vegetable soup prepared from meager pantry staples, over bowls of the hearty broth accompanied by slices of day-old bread. She elaborated on the nuances of Mark's involvement in the farm's demise, admitting that beyond the forged signatures on the loans, He had persuaded them to liquidate personal assets, including heirloom jewelry passed down through generations to cover interim shortfalls, only to abscond with the proceeds under the guise of negotiating better terms with the investors. A betrayal that extended to withholding information about Sarah's deteriorating mental health during the chaotic months leading to her overdose. The conversation flowed more freely this time, her guardedness easing under the weight of prolonged isolation. And when I gently revisited the locked room, suggesting a collaborative effort to catalog items for potential sentimental value in bridging the family divide, she acquiesced without protest, leading me inside where the dim bulb illuminated shelves groaning under boxes of ledgers and personal effects that chronicled the arc of their aspirations from prosperous harvests to bitter dissolution. Amid the disarray of faded dresses folded neatly in tissue paper and bundles of unsent letters addressed to Mark in elegant script, my eyes were drawn to a corner shelf transformed into an impromptu shrine adorned with flickering tea lights surrounding clustered photographs of Mark and Sarah in their youth, interspersed with handwritten notes pleading for his return and forgiveness in tones that blended maternal longing with unresolved accusation. Yet the true shock came when I spotted a recent color printout pinned among the mementos, depicting my own engagement photo from the Save the Date announcement we had shared on social media months earlier. The image capturing Mark and me smiling radiantly against a sunset backdrop that now felt tainted by the context of its placement in this hidden sanctum of obsession. "How did this get here?" I demanded, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me as Linda averted her gaze, mumbling something about anonymous mailings that arrived sporadically without return addresses, suggesting Mark himself might have sent it as a manipulative gesture to gauge their reaction or perhaps sabotage the wedding from afar. The implication twisted like a knife, implying layers of surveillance or involvement I had never suspected, and as I surreptitiously photographed the shrine's contents for my growing archive using my phone's camera under the cover of adjusting a loose frame, the atmosphere thickened with unspoken threats that made the room feel claustrophobic despite its sparse furnishings. Excusing myself momentarily to step into the hallway under the pretense of a phone call to confirm a client appointment, I overheard Robert's raised voice from the backyard arguing with Linda about the dangers of entertaining strangers who stirred up buried pains, his words laced with a protectiveness that bordered on paranoia, prompting me to retreat hastily while pocketing a small journal from the shelf that detailed Sarah's final days in Sarah's own handwriting, its pages filled with pleas for Mark's intervention amid the family's unraveling. As I drove away into the gathering night with the journal's revelations echoing in my mind, entries describing Mark's heated arguments over the stolen funds and his abrupt departure, leaving her to fend against creditors alone, the conflict within me reached a fever pitch, my choices feeling increasingly reckless and self-destructive in the face of potential fallout that could dismantle not just our engagement, but the very trust one had sought to preserve. Just as the city lights of Chicago came into view on the horizon, my phone vibrated insistently in the console, displaying an incoming call from the same unknown number that had texted before, and upon answering with a tentative hello, a distorted voice on the other end warned in urgent whispers that I needed to stop immediately because Mark's past concealed dangers far greater than financial deceit, including connections to individuals who would go to extreme lengths to ensure certain truths remained forever silenced, leaving me gripping the steering wheel tighter as the call disconnected abruptly and the road ahead stretched into uncertainty laced with the dread of impending confrontation. The distorted voice on that anonymous call fading into static as I hurtled toward the familiar skyline of Chicago with the journal's damning entries now committed to memory like verses from a tragic Midwestern ballad that recounted Sarah's descent into despair amid the family's financial freefall, left me navigating the final miles in a state of heightened vigilance where every shadow cast by passing billboards seemed to harbor potential threats from Mark's concealed network of associates who might enforce silence through intimidation or worse, amplifying the internal turmoil that had escalated from mere curiosity into a full-blown crisis threatening the very foundation of the life we had constructed together over shared dreams of stability and companionship. Arriving back at our apartment under the guise of a late-night client meeting that had extended unexpectedly, I encountered Mark emerging from the shower wrapped in a towel with that disarming smile he reserved for moments of reconnection, inquiring casually about the day's developments while drying his hair with absent-minded vigor, yet his eyes held a probing quality that suggested he sensed the undercurrents of secrecy mirroring his own, prompting me to deflect with fabricated details about a promising lakeside property that required further due diligence before committing to an offer. That night, as we settled into the routine of streaming a light-hearted comedy series on the couch with bowls of microwave popcorn that provided a fleeting illusion of normalcy amid the wedding preparations, reaching their final stages with confirmations for the caterer and adjustments to the playlist featuring timeless tunes from our youth that evoked nostalgic reflections on enduring love, I lay beside him in the darkness after the credits rolled, the journal hidden in my bedside drawer serving as a talisman of unresolved confrontation that kept sleep at bay while questions swirled about the extent of his deceptions and whether revealing them would liberate or destroy the partnership I had invested so much emotional capital into rebuilding after the wreckage of my previous marriage. Morning brought a deceptive clarity with sunlight streaming through the bedroom blinds to illuminate the scattered remnants of our engagement calendar marked with tasks like selecting the cake topper and coordinating with the photographer for candid shots that captured authentic joy. Yet the weight of accumulated evidence compelled me to orchestrate a final reckoning that would force Mark to confront the ghosts he had attempted to outrun, beginning with a composed email to the title specialist, requesting verification on the lingering lien against the Oak Lane property to confirm its ties to the offshore accounts hinted at in Sarah's journal entries describing heated exchanges, where Mark boasted of untouchable funds secured through creative accounting practices. The confirmation arrived swiftly, detailing how the investment entity had funneled proceeds into entities bearing Mark's indirect signatures, a revelation that solidified the narrative of deliberate sabotage rather than youthful error. And armed with this irrefutable proof alongside the voice recordings and annotated timelines compiled in a digital folder on my laptop, I resolved to return to Milford one last time, not as a tentative visitor, but as a catalyst for truth. Packing the car with a bottle of their preferred bourbon as a gesture of finality rather than reconciliation, and setting out under a sky heavy with impending rain that mirrored the storm brewing within my resolve. The drive unfolded in contemplative silence, broken only by the rhythmic patter of wipers against the windshield as intermittent showers blurred the highway, allowing reflections on the moral ambiguities of my actions that positioned me as both avenger and interloper in a family saga where my outsider status amplified the potential for irreversible harm. Disagreeing vehemently with the path I had chosen, yet unable to pivot away from the momentum that demanded closure before vows could bind me to a man whose integrity now appeared as illusory as the prosperity he had built upon others' ruins. Pulling up to 142 Oak Lane amid the downpour that turned the street into a slick ribbon of reflection, I found Robert and Linda waiting on the porch under a tattered awning, their expressions a blend of weary anticipation and guarded hope as they ushered me inside, where the living room shrine had expanded with fresh clippings from recent local papers speculating on corporate scandals in the city that unknowingly circled Mark's firm. Over glasses of the bourbon poured generously to ward off the chill seeping through the walls, they laid bare the complete haunting truth in a torrent of confessions prompted by my presentation of the documents and recordings that corroborated their fragmented accounts, explaining how Mark had not merely mismanaged the farm's finances, but engineered a comprehensive cover-up following Sarah's overdose, which investigations had quietly questioned due to inconsistencies in the timeline and toxicology reports suggesting deliberate tampering with her medication supply during the height of family arguments over the embezzled trust fund intended for her education and future independence. Robert's voice cracked as he described the night in question when Mark, enraged by Sarah's discovery of the forgeries and her threats to expose him to authorities, had left her in a vulnerable state with access to the pills, only for the parents to arrive home later and fabricate the narrative of accidental ingestion tied to farm-related depression to shield him from prosecution. A pact sealed by his promise of anonymous restitution that never fully materialized beyond sporadic cash drops. Linda added the emotional layers, revealing that the wall of clippings and the locked room shrine represented their obsessive vigil for redemption, a desperate attempt to reclaim the son lost to ambition while grappling with the guilt of enabling his escape. And the anonymous calls or texts likely stemmed from Mark's own paranoia, using burners to monitor interlopers like me who threatened to unravel the fragile stasis they all maintained. The gasp from my initial visit echoed in this fuller context, not just from the visual clutter, but from the palpable aura of fractured devotion that permeated the house like an unending wake for the family they once were, leaving me to absorb the horror that Mark's cold estrangement served as a self-imposed exile to bury his culpability in Sarah's death and their destitution, a haunting far more psychological than supernatural. Empowered by this culmination of revelations that painted our engagement as unwittingly complicit in perpetuating the cycle of silence, I enacted my final act of revenge with a calculated wit that leveraged the digital age's reach. Crafting an anonymous social media post on a pseudonymous account frequented by real estate professionals and local business networks, weaving a cautionary tale of family investments turned nightmare, with veiled references to forged deeds, hidden liens, and the human cost of unchecked ambition, complete with redacted excerpts from the documents that hinted at broader implications without naming names. The post designed to go viral through shares among Midwest entrepreneurs wary of similar pitfalls and subtly alerting Mark's colleagues to the shadows in his professional ledger. Watching the likes and comments accumulate from my phone as I drove away from Milford with the rain easing into a misty drizzle, the satisfaction mingled with a hollow ache for this exposure promised to erode his career facade without direct accusation, a clever strike that satisfied the justice I sought while preserving plausible deniability in our personal sphere. Returning home that evening to find Mark pacing the living room with his phone clutched tightly, his face a mask of controlled fury as he demanded explanations for the online buzz circling his name. I met his gaze steadily and revealed the extent of my discoveries in a measured recounting that stripped away the last veils of pretense. Watching as his defenses crumbled into admissions laced with justifications about protecting us from the past's toxicity and his intentions to make amends post-wedding through a surprise inheritance settlement. Yet the argument escalated into irreconcilable accusations, with him storming out into the night vowing space to process the betrayal from both sides, only for silence to follow over the ensuing days, marked by cancelled vendor contracts and returned engagement gifts. That signaled the wedding's abrupt dissolution via a terse group email citing irreconcilable differences. In the weeks that blurred into a haze of refunded deposits and sympathetic calls from friends who speculated on the drama without grasping its depths, Mark vanished completely, his apartment cleared of personal effects, phone disconnected, and professional contacts reporting a sudden resignation followed by relocation rumors to the West Coast where fresh starts beckoned for those fleeing scandals, and a solitary package arrived at my door containing the unsigned check for Sarah's trust fund made payable to Robert and Linda, accompanied by a note in his handwriting pleading for understanding amid the chaos he had wrought. Contacting the Reynolds brought a mix of gratitude and sorrow, with Linda forgiving my role in the exposure as a necessary catalyst for partial restitution, while Robert warned that some truths unearthed more questions than resolutions, leaving me to ponder in the quiet of my now empty home whether their confessions held the full measure of innocence or concealed complicit layers in the cover-up, and if my vengeful meddling had truly liberated them or merely shifted the haunting to my own conscience, where unanswered dilemmas about inherited traumas and the fragility of love persisted like echoes in an abandoned farmhouse. The door to 142 Oak Lane remains etched in my mind as the portal to that initial gasp, a symbol of secrets that refuse to stay buried and the enduring uncertainty of whether forgiveness or severance offers the greater peace, compelling me even now to wonder if I would knock again, knowing the ghosts awaiting on the other side.